Hey guys, it's Lou here from databare.com. Welcome back to yet another DAX Bare necessity. If you missed last week's video, please go to the Data Bare YouTube channel to find our first video, the first of our Bare necessity series, an introduction to sum, SumX, and calculate. This week, we'll be building on that knowledge, taking us just one step closer to becoming DAX Jedis. So let's have a look. What do we have today? Well, today we are going to look at calculate. Now, calculate is probably the most important DAX function of all. It's probably also the only function in DAX where you can change the filter context. So let's jump right in and see what this function has for us. Looking at the syntax of calculate, we can see that calculate evaluates the expression, but it does so over a number of filters. So first, it will go and apply our filters, return a table, and calculate an expression over that table. Let's jump in deeper to see how this works. So to start off, I think let's do our first calculation. Will be just a base calculation for sales. So we are going to just call it, let's just call it sales. And we are going to do the sum of the sales table from the total sales column. A simple sum. And let's format this to British pound. Great. Let's first create our matrix, and I want to show the total sales by the customer name. So let's put that in the row, and let's put our sales into values. Great. Just slightly increase the font of our table. Fantastic. Okay, so what is the whole deal with calculate? So if we look at calculate, filters are evaluated first in the outer context, the outer filter context, and then combined together, and finally is used to build a new filter context into which DAX calculates. So in other words, if you use calculate in your development and you know that there's often an outer filter context. So in this case, customer name will be an outer filter context, because irrespective of the measure we put in this matrix, you would still, so each of these customer names are in essence a filter that gives us the corresponding value. So I want to do the sales amount where the sales quantity is larger than 100. So let's do that now. Create a new measure, and I'm going to call it sales quantity greater than 100. Okay, I want to do calculate, and we go to the next line. So I want to sum the sales table, total sales. Actually, let's pick up a measure. Remember, we just created a sales measure. So let's use the sales measure, and I want to calculate where the sales quantity is greater than 100, and let's close it. Let's format to British pound, and we'll put it on our canvas. Fantastic. So we can see here already that these amounts are less than the original total sales amounts. And the reason for that is that it's filtered the sales quantity on the inside of the evaluation, but it's done so after it's filtered on customer name. So let's look at that quickly. If we go to the sales table, so basically what it's done, it's gone and chosen for each of these cells, it's gone and filtered on the customer name. It chooses ACM plumbing. That's the outer filter context. Then it goes to the inner filter context inside the DAX calculate. And it goes to quantity, and it applies a filter greater than 100, and then it sums the total sales amount together. And it does so for each of these rows to give us an answer. Sorry, in this one, greater than 100. And finally, it sums it all together at the bottom. So that's, in essence, what Calculate does. But let's explore this a bit further. Let's create another measure. And then for this one, let's do a similar calculation. And I'm going to call it total sales with the quantity that's greater than 100. But this time, I'm going to use sum x instead of sum. So let's see how that works. So let's do a calculate. And let's do sum x. We want the sales table, and we want to do sales. We want to do the sales unit price multiplied by the sales quantity. Great. And then finally, we want to include the filter context. So we want to say sales with the quantity is greater than 100. And let's just close the bracket. Let's change this to British pound. And let's put it on the canvas. Okay, great. So it does exactly the same thing. You can see that the answer from our sum and from our sum x is the same. The difference with sum x is that the way it evaluates, it will go row by row. It starts with the sales quantity. If it goes down the row of each item in our table and it finds a quantity greater than 100, it will calculate unit price times sales and store that value. And once it reached the bottom of our table, it will sum all those values together and return the answer. That's the difference between a sum and a sum x. If you want to review that, please go and have a look at last week's video where we looked at sum x, and calculate. So let's do another few measures just to explain how calculate works. So I'm going to create a new measure. By the way, if you want to create a new measure, you would know that the table that you last selected or clicked on, if you click on new measure here, it will create the measure underneath that table or a part of that table content. If you want to easily place that measure in a specific group, you can just right click on it and then say new measure. That's the easiest way. So okay, let's do the sales quantity greater than 100. And in fact, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a few of other interesting functions into our calculate to see how it deals with that. So let's do a calculate. So calculate, and let's do a sum of the sales, total sales. But in this case, let's add a filter function at the all function. So we're going to filter all values from the sales where so the sales quantity, the sales quantity where the sales quantity is greater than 100. I already have the name, so let's call it the equivalent of our previous calculation. Great, we will format this to British pound. So it seems like it's still doing the same thing. So if we look at our two measures, we have the first one, which is just a normal calculate, and we add in a filtered expression where the quantity is larger than 100. Our second one, we used, we did the same thing, but instead of sum, we used SUMX to get us the same value. And in the last one, we've now said calculate the sum of the total sales. But before you do that, filter the table, and this all function returns the entire the entire table. So irrespective of your outside filter context, it will force the calculation to return the entire table, and then filter it where the sales quantity is greater than 100. Okay, great. So we have three separate calculations which are different, yet provides us the exact same answer. And they get to that answer in slightly different ways, as I've just explained. But let's use another few examples that I want to use just to explain how these other calculations will work if we apply an outside filter context. So let's do the first measure. And this one, I want to do the sales of the customer that's called the courtyard. Okay, so I want to filter all sales where the customer name is the courtyard. Let's first do a SUMX. And let's do a filter with the sales, and then I want to also apply another function, and we'll get to these functions in more depth later, but I want to use the related function. So related fetches the value from a related table. I want to go and find the customer name from customers table where it's equal to the courtyard. Okay, and then finally we want to be able to do the sales unit price multiplied by the sales of quantity. The sales table, quantity from the sales table, excuse me. And let's close it. Great. So I want to just quickly remove our previous calculations here, and then let's add our new one. Let's just quickly format it to British pound. Okay. So what's happening here? It's now returned a value, but only for the courtyard. So this sales, this formula goes, and remember SumX is an iterator, so it goes through each line in the table and calculates the sales unit price by the quantity. But before it does so, it goes and finds the courtyard value and applies that filter in the customer's customer name direction, and it comes back and only gives us the unit price times quantity for the courtyard. Okay, so let's do another measure. This time a calculate. So we are going to do the sales of the courtyard. The courtyard, and let's just add calc at the bottom so we know this is our calculate function. And let's do a calculate. Let's do a calculate of the sales measure. Remember, we created our sales measure first. So in calculate, you can call either a sum of a particular column, or you can call a measure. So let's do sales, and let's do we want to filter the customer name, where it's equal to the courtyard. Great. And finally, let's close it. Let's format it. And let's add it to our canvas. Okay, so it seems like it's doing the same thing, right? It's calculated the courtyard value of the total sales for the courtyard customer. So before we add an outer filter context, I want to add one more calculation. Let's add one more measure. And like before, for this one, I want to calculate the sales of the courtyard. And this time I want to use calculate. I want to use filter, and I want to use all. As an introduction to how some of these functions operate within calculate, I think I'll include those here. I won't go into too much depth. Okay, and let's do the calculate again of the sales measure, and let's apply a filter, and let's do all of the sales customer name. Customer name is the bottom, and let's filter the sales customer name where it's equal to the courtyard. Okay, let's wait for it. Okay, there we go. And let's use British pound. Great, so just again to go over this. So what this does, before it calculates the sales, it first applies the filter context. So what this does, a filter is a table function. It returns a table based on a expression. So what this filter does, in all fetches all the sales from the all the customer names from the sales table. This could be a column, or just like that, just the entire sales table. But in this case, we want to return the customer name. So it gives us a unique list of the customer names, and then filters the customer name where it's equal to the courtyard. And then finally, it applies the sales. It sums the total sale value. So let's add that into our canvas. Okay, interesting. So it returns a value for every single customer, but which is equal to the courtyard. So in this case, it actually forces the internal filter context over and above the outer filter context. So let's add customer name as a slicer, and let's see what happens. So if I click on ACME plumbing, okay, so where we've got the courtyard, nothing shows. Let's choose another one. Nothing shows except for where we forced the filter. Let's click on the courtyard, and then as expected, we find a calculation value for the sales, where we did the normal sales function, where we do a normal calculate, and of course where we're forcing the filter. So I hope you're starting to get how this function works. It really does get a lot more complex, and we'll go into especially filter and all in the coming videos. But for now, just know that for calculate, it first evaluates the filter context, the outer, then the inner, and then calculates the expression. Thank you so much for joining us this week, and if you like this video, hit the subscribe button. Remember to click the bell icon so that you can get notified when we add new videos. So until next time, keep safe and stay blessed.
Visit databare.com to find out more about how we can turn your reporting dreams into a reality. Your data, our story.